So excited to be here today for this amazing YA panel. I'm Alex. I'm an editor at 17 Magazine, and we're going to talk to these amazing YA authors about everything, about their books and themes and everything else about writing. So I'll start by introducing them. First, we have David Levithan. He wrote Every Day. Woo! He's the author of the bestseller Every Day, and the sequel to that book, Another Day, is coming out on August 25th. Then we have Jodi Picoult and her daughter, Samantha van Leer. They are the authors of the bestseller Off the Page that was released earlier this month. And you can hear more about their story in 17. Shameless plug for that. Then we have Lockhart. She is the best-selling author of We Were Liars. And then next to her, we have Meg Wolitzer, who is the best-selling author of Bell Jar, which is coming out in paperback on September 15th, which is very exciting. And then we have Jennifer Niven, who is the best-selling author of All the Bright Places. And at the end, we have Nicola Yoon, who her debut novel, Everything, Everything, comes out on September 1st. So we'd love to start by just going down and having each person talk a little bit about their book, so people can get a little bit of a background if they don't have it already.
Cool. So, tip me off the water. The book that I have coming out on August 25th is called Another Day. To describe it, I have to explain that I wrote a book called Every Day that about, I don't know how many years ago, 4 years ago now, which is about somebody who wakes up every morning in a different life, in a different body. And the big challenge is when this person falls in love with somebody and suddenly has to negotiate what it's like to have connection to the world after living a whole life without trying to make connections. So Another Day just flips it. It's the same exact events as Every Day, but it is told from the point of view of the girl Rhiannon that the main character falls in love with. So if the first book is about what would your life be like if you weren't defined by what people see, the second book is, can you fall in love with somebody who changes every day?
That's cool. So Sammy and I wrote a book called Between the Lines a couple of years ago. And this was a book that was Sammy's idea when she was 14, 13.
Oh my God.
I don't know, we've been on tour so long, I don't even know who she is anymore. When she was 13 years old, she called me up when I was on a book tour for one of my grown-up books, and she said, I have a really great idea for a book. And I said, all right, let's hear it.
Squeak this around. Okay, so I was daydreaming in my 8th grade French class, and exactly, I know, I'm a great student. And I was thinking about what happens to characters when we close our books, because I just couldn't believe that they stayed frozen in time, waiting for us to return and breathe the life back into them. And so I started to think of these different personalities that characters could take while the book is closed, and I thought, what if there was a prince in a fairy tale who was like really sick of saving the princess every single day? And what if there was a girl in the real world who was kind of obsessed with this fairy tale because the prince in it was really hot? And what would happen if they were able to get together and try to bring this prince out of the book where his life is so static and the same and into the world we live in where every day is different?
So when we started writing Between the Lines, I realized my daughter, of course, was a genius because we have all had literary crushes, right? And we've all wanted them to come out of books. And if Between the Lines was about what it means to get a happy ending, then Off the Page, which is the companion book that we've just published, is really about whether or not there are consequences to getting your happy ending. If you have everything go right, does that mean that you have to sacrifice other good things in your life? And as we now reunite with our star-crossed lovers, Prince Oliver and Delilah, we see that maybe that's the case. And so that's kind of the premise for Off the Page.
We Were Liars, which came out last May, is my first book to ever have a map in the front of it. And this was a lifelong goal of mine. I don't know what to do with myself now that I've achieved it. But I mention that because when you open the book, there is this map of an island. It is a privately owned island off the coast of Massachusetts. It is owned by the Sinclair family. And the Sinclair family consists of a patriarch and 3 beautiful grown daughters like the princesses in a fairy tale. And those daughters have children, and those children and that whole family summer year after year. Summer is a verb in this family. They summer year after year on this private island. And the book is really the story of that generation, that younger generation, and the girl, Cadence Sinclair Eastman, who is the heiress to this family fortune, but also the family's secrets and the family's expectations, the family's racism, the family's crazy. They're crazy. So it's an amnesia story. It's a forbidden love story. It's kind of a psychological thriller with a mystery at its heart. But the book started with the setting, and so the map is the first thing that you will see.
My novel is called Beljar, although a lot of people pronounce it Belzar. I'll answer to anything. I'll answer to Anna Karenina. But the thing about the book, friends of mine joke and call it Breakfast Club meets prep, because it's about a girl who's experienced a terrible loss, and she's sent to a school in Vermont, a boarding school for emotionally fragile, highly intelligent teenagers. I would have killed to go to that school, but no, Syosset High School, you know. She's sent there after she can't get over the loss of her boyfriend, and really, it's about how, when you're young, sometimes it's hard to take the long view. And she enters an English class called Special Topics in English, where they read only one writer. And this year they're reading the writer Sylvia Plath. And I don't know if some of you know the novel The Bell Jar. And the book is kind of riffing on The Bell Jar a little bit. But they write in journals, and when they write in the journals, they're reunited with the thing they've lost. Because for me, I tried to think of the book I would have wanted to find on the shelf when I was younger. That's the thing. It's like you can't go wrong. Anybody really can't go wrong if you write the book that you want to find. You're not cynically looking toward what do other people want to read. What did young Meg want to read? And even old Meg sort of wants to read it too. So it's really about what if you could find a way to stay in the place before things went wrong, sort of to freeze life in that moment. Because it's something that I think when I was young, everything was sort of passionate and difficult. The students write in a journal, and when they write in the journal, that's when the sort of, quote, magic, and I use that word very lightly and metaphorically, happens. But I, too, was a sort of bookish teen, and I had a journal, but I thought that one day maybe I'd be famous, so I started writing it. Today, I watched Bewitched, you know. But then, after a while, I got bored writing in it, and then I felt bad because I saw all the empty pages, so I went back for posterity, and on every page that I hadn't written on, I wrote, nothing happened, nothing happened. But Jam, my main character in Beljar, has a lot to say in her journal, and when she writes in the journal, everything explodes. So that's Beljar.
All the Bright Places is my one-liner, which I was so proud of when I thought of, is it's about a girl who learns to live from a boy who intends to die. Now, this is my 8th book, but my first YA, and I've never been able to summarize any of my books that succinctly, so I was very proud of myself. But it's the opening chapter, these two characters meet on the ledge of their high school bell tower, and they're both thinking about jumping off. Theodore Finch is up there because he's kind of the school freak. He has these very extreme moods. He's either very, very awake or very, very asleep, as he calls it. And he doesn't really understand why he has these moods, and no one else does either. So death is something that he confronts and faces all the time. It's a way of making him feel like he has more control over everything, because he doesn't have control over anything. And Violet Markey is up there because 9 months earlier, her sister died in a car crash, and Violet was a survivor of the crash. And but her world is really just shut down in the aftermath of it. And so they talk each other off the bell tower ledge, and then they go wandering Indiana, which is where I grew up. Now, if you'd asked me when I was in high school if I ever would have written anything about the wonders of Indiana, I would have said, I don't think so. No, but I've come to appreciate it more now as I've written this. So it's really a novel about finding the bright places, even in the darkest times.
Hi, my book is Everything, Everything. It's about a girl, her name is Maddie. She is basically allergic to the entire world. She has like bubble boy disease, etc. She's a girl. So she's never left her house in 17 years. And then one day a family moves next door and there's a really cute boy. And he's wearing all black and he's got ocean blue eyes. And it's about taking risks. It's about what you would do for love. Is it worth risking everything for? I started writing it when my daughter was 4 months old. And when she was born, like, when you just love someone so much and you just want to protect them, she couldn't eat dirt and she couldn't get a cold and I really, really wanted to protect her. And I started thinking, if there was a girl that always needed protecting, what would that do to the relationship with her mom? What would it mean when she starts to break away from her mom and a boy comes into her life? So it's really about the kinds of things you would do for love.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to go down and ask a more individual question. David, I'll start with you. So your book really is astounding in the way that you can take on all these, in every day, take on all these different personalities in every chapter. What was that like, and how was the process of creating all of these different personalities? I feel like you read it and one narrative is more, in depth than the next and the one before it, so.
I mean, it was interesting. Luckily, I'm not a planner in writing. I don't outline, which hopefully makes the books feel more spontaneous because I don't know either. And it was especially important for me for A. So A is the name of the main character of Every Day, who wakes up every day and has since birth in a different body and a different life. And I wanted it so that when I finished a chapter, the day ended, and I was starting a new chapter, who will wake up as the next day? I didn't want to know. I literally decided when I was writing that first paragraph of the next chapter. And it was strange to see where my mind took me and sort of what lives I decided A would go into. But I had a rule that if I started, I would not turn back, and I'd have to live through that day like A had to live through that day. Wow. And that was certainly a challenge. And it was also a challenge as a writer because when you are, I wrote a book called Realm of Possibility that was 20 different voices from 20 different students in the same school, and then you work really hard to make them sound different. You don't want all of your characters to sound the same. With A and with Every Day, it's the opposite. It's all these different lives, all these different bodies and experiences, but at heart, it is still A inside. So even though they were living very different lives, it still had to feel like A, and that's what got me through. With Another Day, it was both easier and harder because it is purely from Rhiannon's point of view, so it was a single voice. But at the same time, a single voice means a very limited experience. And to go from such an expansive experience to somebody who's just normal and just living life, that was very hard and was a challenge that I hopefully was up to.
Yeah, for sure. Jodi and Sammy, so you guys, we know a lot about your writing process, or I do, but I want to share that with the audience, especially first, Jodi, from your perspective. You've been writing up in your attic for so many years by yourself, and how was that, integrating your daughter into this process?
Okay, you make me sound like I'm the mad woman in the attic,
And nobody knew you were there.
It's just, that's where my office is. It's on the 3rd floor. Honestly, it was a really interesting experience because I had never really had a co-author before. And when we first started, I really thought that I knew everything because I'd been doing it for 20-something years and Sammy hadn't. And we would argue about things. For example, in Between the Lines, there's a fairy tale that Prince Oliver's embedded in, and you see snippets of it throughout the book. And when we wrote this, Sammy really wanted the fairy tale to be very dark and gothic, like the Brothers Grimm, and I wanted it to be lighthearted and funny, like Shrek. And she said, no, it's really important that it's intense, because then we see the stakes for Oliver and why he needs to get out of this. And I thought, yeah, okay, that's a really good answer, but I'm still right. So I figured we'd write it the way she wanted to write it, and then when she was at school, I was going to go back and change it without her knowing. And if you read between the lines, you know that the fairy tale segments are actually very dark and gothic, and that's because she was dead on right. And it was sort of a learning process for me to understand that even if she did not have the experience that I had writing, her gut instincts were so strong, I had to treat her as a co-author and not as an intern, basically. Do you want to talk about how we did it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so how we wrote together is actually pretty unique for co-authors. Most times, co-authors will split chapters. A lot of people think that I wrote Delilah's sections and my mom wrote Edgar's, or vice versa. But how we actually wrote was side by side, 8 hours a day. I know, with your mother. Speaking the entire book out loud. My mom would type because I'm slower, and she would get really angry if I couldn't keep up. And we would basically, I would say a line and my mom would counter with another, and we'd just go back and forth like that. And whether it's genetics or we have some creepy thing going on because we've spent too much time together, we'd have moments where we're actually tripping over each other to get a line out because we have this brilliant idea, and we'd realize we were saying the exact same thing. Which is pretty unique, because a lot of people, I don't know, if you think of group projects, you kind of roll your eyes and you're like, oh God, because everyone has a different opinion and completely different ideas when they work together. For us, we had the exact same vision, which made writing together pretty simple, pretty simple. But it could have been much more difficult, and so we were very lucky to have that sort of genetic bond.
Yeah. And I will also add that I feel it's important that you know that Sammy spent most of our writing process lying on the floor wrapped in a down comforter, which is how apparently she was the most creative. So, yeah.
Love it. Thank you. So we have E. Lockhart. What your book is? It's planted in reality. It seems, but you know, there's a lot of elements of fairy tales and other like parallels going through. Why was that important for you to include, and what were the implications of that for the reader?
Well, I wanted to write a book that used endowed objects. And what I mean by an endowed object is basically a symbolic object in a book that means stuff beyond just being the object that it is. You know, like the ring in The Hobbit, in The Lord of the Rings, right? It's important. So one thing that happened to me when I was growing up was, it was the 70s, and I lived in a single-parent household, and my mom and I, for about 5 or 6 years of my childhood, lived in a communal house. This was in Massachusetts, in Cambridge, and it was basically a house full of Harvard hippies who were meditating and smoking marijuana and doing yoga. And so my parents had been divorced when I was 2, and we moved into this house, and we lived there, and then the landlords didn't like us, so we moved to another one, and then we moved to another one. Anyway, this household of sort of, you know, hippies was moving from place to place in the Cambridge area over the course of 5 or 6 years. So we did not have a lot of furniture. I am getting to the point. We did not have a lot of furniture. We had mattresses on the floor, that kind of thing. But what we did have was a box, a cardboard box full of beautifully illustrated fairy tales. These were late 19th and early 20th century collections with illustrations by people like Arthur Rackham and Kay Nielsen and Edmund Dulac, beautiful tipped-in color plates with special tissue paper on top of them. So I was allowed every now and then to read these fairy tales, and they meant a lot to me. I had to wash my hands before I touched these books. I had to be supervised while I turned the pages of the tissue paper, and so on. So why on earth did we have this fancy-ass box of books when we did not even have a bookshelf? I'm going to tell you why. These were books, I only found this out later, that my father had given to my mother when they were courting. Aww. So we were carrying around a box of my parents' marriage, and I was allowed to touch it with clean hands under supervision. So that's what an endowed object is. So I took this memory of my childhood, and I wanted to write about a family, the Sinclair family in We Were Liars, that really put all of their baggage into objects. This family, there's a lot of money, but there are also, family jewels and art objects and books and houses and an entire island that are endowed with all of this family baggage. And so I started wanting to write about a family like that, and what would it be like to be a young person in a family like that, and the kinds of conflicts that would be going on between those three beautiful daughters of that powerful patriarch and their conflicts over the objects that they had. And so it became a very natural extension for me to take the stories in those fairy tales about sisters who are put into competition with each other, stories like Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, and the story that is very similar to Shakespeare's King Lear, which is usually titled As Meat Loves Salt, in which there are, two bad sisters and one good sister. And so I was interested in that paradigm. So that kind of combination of the fairy tales that I'd grown up with and the idea of endowed objects fused together in the novel.
Amazing, thank you. Meg, so in your book, I think one of the things that stood out the most was the idea of this love and how much it affected the main character instantly. And like you said, she went to a boarding school away because she couldn't handle that depression. How did you get the insight to insert this idea of young love, and what were your thoughts in making it such a drastic kind of part of her life, so much so that she needed to get mental help for it?
I just want to say before I answer that Jodi and Sammy, I have to basically pay my son to have meals with me. And
Actually, Random House paid Sammy to work with me. So.
and it's like $20 extra to have a conversation while we eat. No, I kid thee. Young love, oh my God. Okay, so I had this boyfriend, and I did not lose him tragically. I lost him in a very, really tedious teen way. But his father was a jeweler, and he made for me one of those heart necklaces where I had half and he had half, and they were jagged, and they go together. And I recently found it, and I burst into tears. It had his name on it, and it just brought everything back to me so deeply. We met at summer camp, we met at summer camp. All I can say, so he was sick and in the infirmary, and I snuck in and visited him late at night and felt his forehead. I remember this, I haven't actually thought about this or talked about this once until you asked this question. This is sort of like the teen version of Proust's Madeleine, dipping it into tea. I'm
Thinking all about, have you guys read The Interestings?
Yes.
Yeah.
Summer camp. Yeah.
all right.
And
Well,
summer camp.
yes,
Summer camp
that's
love
my adult
things,
novel.
it's
That's a
all-
summer camp. It's all I'm one. I'm
She's
like
all-
of one
it's all
piece.
coming together.
It's all coming back to me now. I'm having a real flashback to my life. So David. Oh, sorry, I said his name. Oh God. No.
Not this David.
I can't believe I did that. Well,
But we have him outside, right?
right, I know. Seth. I was kidding. His name isn't Dave. So, in addition to the necklace, we had long conversations about what we would do when we met, and they were kind of like would we kiss? What would we do? And I jokingly have said, in recent years, that he basically sent me a letter in the mail discussing this, and it was like the Magna Carta on an illuminated manuscript, "Whilst thou go to second base, milady," It was so formal, this idea of the negotiations of young love. And when the thing about objects are, you talk about objects, they are so important because they remind us of people. And when I found that necklace, the whole thing really came flooding back to me. And yet, I'm not in pain that Steve and I broke up. I'm not, because I'm happily married and I've been married forever. But you feel these like punctures of your heart once in a while. And with Beljar, it's really about that feeling like that she loved her boyfriend Reeves so much, and she lost him tragically, and she can't believe that she has to move on. So she's not moving on. She's going a little bit into the past. And when Bill and I broke up, you know, Tom was really kind of, it was very, very, very hard. And yet, here I am, living to tell the tale. I mean, that's the thing. You can't take the long view necessarily when you're 15 or 16. And I really wanted to kind of try to describe that process of going from taking the short view to taking the long view and taking it seriously and remembering the pain of that, but also knowing that things do get better. They really, really do. So that was Beljar for me.
Actually, I wanted to say it's kind of worth noting that all of us, with the exception of Sammy, are really not young adults, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I think the reason that we all come back to this genre is because those memories are so strong still. So for those of you in the audience who are Sammy's age, one day you're still going to be thinking about all this stuff.
For me, the thing is, because I write about adolescence like in The Interestings and in my adult novels, because adolescence is a time of firsts. You're never going to have that again. It's the first time everything happened to you. We can all remember so much back then, so deeply and powerfully. For those of you who are teenagers now, you will never forget so much of what's going on in your life right now. But you know that.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, you know, channeling back to this teen life, Jennifer, I mean, your book deals a lot with mental illness, and, you know, I know you said it's based on someone that you knew. Why was it important for you to address mental illness in this way, and why did you want to do that, and what did that mean for you?
Thank you. I think that, you know, the most important thing when I sat down to write it was I wanted to write the story of this boy I knew and loved years ago. And I'd always known I wanted to write about him and about the experience because it was so profound for me. And as Meg is saying, you don't forget that. And I you know, think about him every day. And I didn't know if I could do it, though. It's a book I've carried around with me for a really long time, but I didn't know if I could actually do it. And so when I sat down to do it, I thought, no one will ever know if it completely sucks, and I will just try my best to do this. And it came out very quickly. And I think that more than just thinking about, you know, I want to write this book because it deals with mental illness, and I think it's very important, which it is, to talk about. I think I just wanted to talk about this boy, and he was the most alive person, one of the most alive people I've ever known. And I think one of the really wonderful things that has come out of telling the story, and one thing that I discovered as I was beginning to tell it, was that, you know, I needed to talk about the whole experience more than I ever did at the time of knowing him and then after knowing him, because he's a boy I lost as well. And so it was really important for me to talk about it. And I thought, you know what? It's important for me to talk about it. It's important for everyone to talk about. And I think the stigma is such a horrible thing. And I think one thing I've seen the book do is it's reached people who have needed to know that they're not alone. You know, that there are actually other people who feel the way they do. And it's okay to say, actually, it's important to say, I need help with this, or I'm feeling this way. And I think that, you know, it was a very emotional journey, and it still is for me to have written it, but I know that he would be just so thrilled with the response that it's getting from teens like him, who needed someone to talk to and who, you know, really see that there are bright places, as I said, even in the darkest times. That's such a serious answer. Can I say something funny now?
Sure.
I don't have anything.
Thank you. I mean, so so we can go on a little bit of a lighter note. As E said, the map was so important to her in her book, and Nicola, in your book, there are a lot of illustrations, and there are charts, and there are like online orders. Why was that important for you to include, and how do you think that propels the narrative in a different way than just text?
So, Maddie has been in her house her entire life. And I feel like someone who is trapped inside would try to remake the world. She would try to imagine what it was like. So it actually started off with, I write from 4 to 6 a.m. in the morning, and it's really great actually because you're so tired you can't edit yourself. So this is a good for anyone who's aspiring. You can't, you just write. And I thought, she would make her world, and she's obsessed with Hawaii. And I drew a stick figure. I am a terrible, terrible artist. So I drew this fish, and it was 4 a.m. And it's the Hawaiian state fish, which is the humu humu nuku nuku apua'a. And my 3-year-old can say that because I made her learn how to say that. So I drew this fish, and then my husband can draw, and I woke him up, and I said, honey, Maddie would do this. Can you please draw me this fish? And I have the best husband in the world because he got up, he gave me a kiss, he made some coffee, he sat down, and he drew the fish. And that is the same fish that's on page 2 in the book. But it really grew out of I feel like someone who's never seen the world would want to recreate it, to try to understand it, to try to take it into herself in a way. There are recipes in the book. There are lists. She's a big reader. She does reviews. She's a strange girl. She's been trapped. So I felt like a non-traditional storytelling would be something that's how she would relate to the world.
Great, thank you. So now this is a question for anyone, and you actually just touched on the idea that you're not teens, except for Sammy. But
Sammy's actually 60. She just looks really
119, amazing.
And it's something we taught, at 17 Magazine. We're not teens either, but we're writing for them, and we have to constantly get into their brains. So for you guys, how do you channel the teen mindset when you're creating these books for them to make sure that it's engaging and it's relatable and all of that?
It really helps when you have a teen sitting next to you. There were actually things that we'd write, and Sammy would say, absolutely not. Nobody says that anymore. What, on fleek? That's what I learned on this book tour. I'd never heard that before. On fleek, right? How many kids here know what on fleek is? How many adults have never heard of that before? Yeah, okay. So this is what a gender gap looks like.
All your books are on fleek. We can say that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Right.
But I know that for me, having her there was like having a reality check all the time, because she would be able to say, that's not what a teen would say, or that is what a teen would say. Very often, one of the things I like the most about writing with you is that the way she would see the world is very much the way a teen would see the world. One of my favorite metaphors that she came up with was the idea of popular girls clustered together like grapes, because do you ever see just one? Right? And as soon as she said it, I just stopped typing and started laughing, because it was so spot on. But that's exactly the way a teenage girl would see that in high school. And I write a lot of teens. In a lot of my adult books, I love the teenage voice, because if you put a teenager in a book, it's a built-in BS meter. They don't let anyone get away with anything else. And because of that, when I'm writing one of my grown-up books, I often will interview teens to make sure that I'm thinking and speaking the way that they would speak. But it was a little different, I think, to write this book, because we were going back, like Meg was saying, to this point of remembering what it felt like the very first time you found someone who felt like your other half. And it was really, in this case with Oliver and Delilah, it's really hard to connect with that person. And I should also say the other really strange thing for me about YA fiction is I read a lot of YA fiction. I don't think YA fiction gets the kind of coverage that it should, because in many ways, very much like the comic book world, it is the leading edge of uncomfortable subjects. So you have something like mental illness, you have something like, young kids who are coming out or who are transgender in David's books. You have a lot of, you have Laurie House Anderson's incredible books about PTSD and about sexual assault. You have things that a lot of adult authors are too scared to talk about that are going on in the YA world, and I think that's an incredible thing. and a really good way to start conversations with young people that they should be having. Ironically, I have so many of those conversations when I write my adult books that I actually step back to do something that was very light and sweet. And, you know, there's an emotional resonance to Off the Page, too. There's sadness that happens in that book. But for me, it was a total breath of fresh air to come back to the YA world and to write. I'll shut up now.
Well, I think I'm just kind of the opposite of you.
Really?
Well, just in the sense that all I am trying to do is get the inside of my head onto the page so that I am not en fleek or anything else. I make up my own slang. I try to make up a verbal universe that thematically and I don't know, just in terms of, you know, create regionally, and is a benefit kind of to the, you know, making an imaginary world a mental space. And I'm just trying to get like what is in here onto some kind of paper, computer screen, whatever, and I'm just trusting that if I do that and then I play around with the slang in an amusing way, somehow the combination of those two things is like maybe an emotional truth and a entertaining veneer will resonate because it would resonate with me. But the idea of being current or understanding teenagers, I live with one, I don't get her at all, is you know, kind of separate from my writing life.
I have to say, speaking of slang, I tried to do an experiment that my kids wanted no part of. I wanted them to go around school years ago, you can really hear where this is going, and introduce a new phrase, and I wanted to see if it would somehow catch on. And it was so bad. It was double duh.
What was it?
Double duh. Like, so stupid. Double duh. And they were like so mortified that I would even think that they would do this. Because how do these phrases come about? But they just sort of enter the lexicon. That said, living with teenagers who are now out of the house, living with teenagers, you do pick up so much, like magnetic filings, the way they talk, but not even just what they say, but how they say it and with what tone. And those nuances, I think, are really important in YA and in any kind of fiction. Speaking of the sort of progressiveness of the YA community, I absolutely agree. I think it's really, it just seems on the edge. You know, when I started taking writing workshops when I was in college, the best advice, and if any of you are writing, are some of you writing, trying to write? Oh, great, okay. The best advice I ever got to this day is write what's important. And what my teacher meant by that is write what's important to you. Which nobody can tell you what that is. And I think there's so much in YA where you can see that these are stories that need to get out. They have a reason to be. And those are the stories that really, really work. So when I wrote Beljar, I wanted to really just sort of write what would be important to my character and what's important to me, and where's the sort of Venn diagram overlap. Look, you needed a visual for that. Venn diagram, no, you didn't need a visual. What's important? I think the urgency is what the books you love, that's what's true about them. That they have a kind of urgency about them. And somebody else said, and these are amazing plots to these books, but some writers said that what we remember of the books we love isn't plot, but characters. And I really think that that's absolutely true.
So I think for me, it's just writing about firsts that I like so much. You know, I feel like when you're, I mean, I still struggle with this. Tend to be like very philosophical. I like the big questions. And I feel like when you're a teenager, you're especially struggling, you know, with like meaning of life and love, and, you know, you're trying to figure out your place in the world. And I think I come from that place where I really want to know, like, is love worth everything? You know, I'm sort of like tragically in love with my husband, but when I met him, I got terrified that I would lose him, right? Because here was someone I loved, like, just beyond like all reason, but you know, my heart was basically outside of my body. And what if something happened to him? And one of the questions I was struggling with this book was, you know, is love worth it when you could lose it? like what does it mean to is it worth taking that risk when, your heart would just be destroyed? And then I had my daughter, and I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to survive this life, right? So, I think struggling with first, I think teenagers do it, I still do it. So that's part of it for me.
I'll just add, I think being able to tap into the memory of those firsts, it's been a long time since I was in high school, but it feels like yesterday in a lot of ways in terms of the feelings. It also helps that I am still best friends with my high school best friend, and we can be talking about something that we're going through in life that's a little serious, and then he can say, do you remember when we went to that party in 10th grade? Why did Teresa do that to us? And I think that, language aside, obviously slang changes, but I don't think the feelings do. I think those are they're universal.
Thank you. And before we open it up to audience questions, do you guys have any questions for each other?
Well, I want to say either I have read a book by everyone on this panel, or I have them on my iPad to take with me on the next leg of my tour. And they honestly, it's amazing. You guys are really phenomenal writers. And if you haven't read their books, you absolutely should.
And so are you, oh my God.
Well, just stop.
We're crying down here.
Seriously, we're fangirling so hard.
Okay, I love the Love Fest, that we can all fangirl together.
Well, no, it's really important because actually someone asked me coming in here, do you all know each other? And I said, no. And I'm really excited because, we're fans too of each other. Yeah. And, to be able to finally meet people, I've been reading David's books forever. And to finally I was like, oh, he's going to be on this panel. That's so cool. I can finally tell him what I thought of his books. It's just, I kind of wish there was a master writer email list so that we could just write to each other and say.
David has that.
Yeah, same.
You have it?
He actually does.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. But if we just
cool.
wrote to each other, we'd never write our books then.
Yeah, that's true. That's
is
actually
the
true.
problem.
Yeah, but it would be really fun if there was like a Wednesday author cafe where we could all hang out, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, whenever I see who's on a panel, I saw this panel, I lit up. It's like, oh, fun.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So
I know.
cool.
I thought Meg said she was on the panel, and then my publicist says, no, Meg is not on the panel. And I was so upset. And we were back and forth, and then it turned out she was, and I was very happy because we've gotten to be on 4 or 5 panels together this year.
And we never repeat ourselves.
Never.
I will use the metaphor I used at some ceremony after seeing Laurie Hollis Anderson spoke, then Lauren Oliver spoke, and then I had to speak. And I was like, how do I do this? And it just sort of sitting there listening to them, and this goes to what I would say about the how can you write YA and YA emotions? They don't really change. You still have the same insecurities or variations thereof, and still the same fears or variations thereof and emotions. But I would say about the YA community and the YA authors, it is all of the people you should have gone to high school with. You happen to all grow up and go to different high schools, but now, finally, however many years later, whether it's 2 years later or 40 years later, we found each other. And that's why I think the YA community is such a strong community, because there is this feeling of kinship, and that we could just as easily be in those seats as up here. We just happen to be up here this time, but the next time more YA authors are speaking, we'll be in the audience watching, and we'll be really thrilled. So
I heard the greatest thing, speaking to that idea of back in high school and how you would have wanted things to be different. I did not make this up, and I'm going to get it completely wrong, and I don't know who said it, but there was a joke chant. What do we want? For the people who were mean to us in high school to see us now. When do we want it? Then.
Amazing. And then one last one before do you guys have any memorable fan experiences? Has anything crazy happened with a fan that really stands out to you?
So I'm going to tell you guys my all-time favorite fan experience, and let this be a lesson to you all. I was giving a speech, and I was wearing a dress, and I had red shoes on, and I went to the bathroom because authors pee. And all of a sudden, this book comes underneath the stall. And I hear this woman go, would you sign this? And she goes, I recognized your shoes. And I went, could I wash my hands first? So word to the wise, if you want to get something signed, don't do it while your author's in the bathroom stall. That's all.
Yeah, that's
That's about
a hard one to top. I don't know. No one else. Okay.
Although I will say about going to the bathroom, it's actually dangerous, Jodi. No.
To go to the bathroom? Wow.
No, it's dangerous to go to the bathroom after you've given a talk because
you'll never
they
get
don't know
out.
you're in there and you hear, what did you think of that? I didn't care for her. I'm like, I'm in here.
It's also dangerous to go to the bathroom before your talk because everyone's like, hi, I'm here to see you.
It's especially dangerous to go to the bathroom before your talk when you're mic'd.
Yes.
Saying.